I've churned through about 30 delay pedals these last few years. In very rare cases I've sold them because the sound is not agreeing with me, and some pedals don't like line level, or sometimes it's because certain parameters are calibrated in weird ways, but mostly it's about the ergonomics. How easy is it to adjust the sound? Well, one of the pedals I think has got it right. That's the trusty old timeline. There's enough knobs on it to be able to adjust all the parameters that you need to adjust, and when you need to go deeper, it allows you to go deeper pretty easily. So, you know, congrats to them, I reckon. Other little ones like this one, oh boy, it's ugly. I know I mention it every time, but it's so ugly. Very versatile, great little pedal. And yeah, programming wise, it's not too bad, but there's no MIDI in or anything like that. So you've just got to put up with the interface and go, well, it gets a great sound, so I'll just put up with it. Other ones, of course, they're just so basic that you've only got a few controls. You adjust what you can adjust, and there it is. This one hasn't even got a tap tempo in, which is pretty annoying. But other than that, a beautiful pedal. Now, the other two that have survived my many purges here, they've both got a fantastic sound, and they've got enough connections on the back so that they're not irritating in that respect. So they've got real stereo in, they've got a real MIDI in. This sort of TRS rubbish, either for MIDI or for the inputs. So very well appointed pedals. Ergonomics wise, they come at things from completely different ways. So the Future Factory and the Source Audio Nemesis, both of these pedals have a lot of parameters, and the Future Factory lets you access all these parameters directly from the interface. You press a little button, then you turn the encoder. It's sort of like 90s digital synth style, and there's no computer involved, which is great. Everything's available, yet sad to say, it still feels very tedious to operate, especially if you're going into, say, the EQ section where you've got low, medium, and high, and then you've got to cycle through that, and then you turn the encoder, and then you can do that separately for the left or right delays. That's a lot of pressing and a lot of twiddling. So yeah, sure, it's all available from the front panel. It's a very clever design, but it's not much fun to program, really, when it gets down to it. The Nemesis takes a very different approach. It has more knobs. They're always in WYSIWYG mode, which is nice. The center knob chooses the delay engine, and saved with that engine are various deeper parameters. But you can only access those deeper parameters from the computer. I mean, if you want to be a stickler for detail, yes, you can assign different functions to the Nemesis knobs, and you can even assign different functions to the Future Factory knobs for mix and feedback, but then you haven't got mix and feedback, so that's pretty sad for a delay. So generally speaking, the deep functions are either impossible to get to from the pedal, in the case of the Nemesis, or a bit painful to access in terms of the Future Factory. And for me to keep using a bit of kit and not go the way of my other delay pedals that have come and gone, it either has to deliver amazing results or be a lot of fun to use. Well, hopefully both, but one will do. So these two pedals both give excellent results, and now I'm going to attempt to also make them fun to use, and this is what I intend to use: Korg NanoKontrol version 2. I had one of these a while back and I sold it. So this is now part of my bought twice club. Actually, I had a Nemesis and sold that. Got it again, so that's part of a bought twice club. I don't think I've got up to the bought 3 times club yet. That's just embarrassing. Now, certainly this isn't perfect. Unfortunately, it only has USB out rather than real MIDI out, so then you've got to use a MIDI host with it. I wish also it could store and recall presets from the unit itself, but yeah, for a few shillings it's still pretty good value. So what we're going to do is create two profiles, one for the Nemesis, one for the Future Factory. This thing has, actually, let's open it up. This thing has 8 sliders, 8 knobs. Importantly, those knobs and sliders are potentiometers rather than endless encoders. In my Nemesis video, I was using a beat step. Is that all I get? Ah, a wad of irrelevant paper. There's also in there, and all sorts of other things that no one. Free download to use stuff that you're never going to touch. Yes, in my Nemesis video, I had a beat step which has endless encoders, which is not what you want to use for MIDI CC programming on this stuff. So there it is. Nice black NanoKontrol. So 8 sliders, 8 knobs, 35 buttons, which apparently can all be reassigned. And then that is going to be teamed up with each of these little guys. Separately, not at the same time. That's a bit of a bridge too far, I think. Let's go to the Korg control software and see what we need to do. Well, what an exciting time it was. Install the USB driver, install the control software, and then faffed about for an hour trying to get it to communicate. It turns out it was all because in the Korg control editor screen under preferences, where it has set MIDI ports manually, instead of my device here, it had something else that I'd never seen before. Still, at least we can now get into the editor and communicate with the device. But don't celebrate just yet, because this shriveled little pellet is what you've got to look at, and of course, it can't be resized. So we've zoomed in on that as best we can. Now comes the difficult decision of what parameters to assign where. So we'll do the Future Factory delay first, and here is the MIDI specification. So we can peruse this with sort of delightful agonies, wondering which ones we can include and which ones we can't. So let's start with the first knob. So this is going to be a delay time. So we want CC 45 with a full range. CC with a full range. Yay, we've done one. Unfortunately, problems persist with this NanoKontrol 2 and communications, although I can see it in the control software editor here, and I can save configurations and load configurations. I can't actually communicate with the device to receive or write. I've tried so many things, but just can't get it to work. Strangely though, if I go over to my other, much lesser computer, it all works first time, smooth as silk. If I only had this computer, I'd be enraged. If I was just using the other computer and not this one, I'd be going, oh, the Korg control editor is so great and it just works first time. Oh, it's brilliant. So here we are. I finally loaded this thing up, assigned functions to all the knobs and sliders and some of the buttons. But what an intensely frustrating, horrible time I had doing that. It's predisposed me to hate this little thing, and yet in this control mode, it actually does a very fine job. However, there are a couple of things that I don't like about it. There's no actual MIDI out, which is a colossal pain, because it means you've got to do something like this, which is run the USB into a little remote MIDI host. Of course, the MIDI host then has to be powered, and then the MIDI host has an actual MIDI out. But since I want to run a clock into this, then I've got to merge the NanoKontrol MIDI with the incoming clock MIDI, merge that down to one MIDI stream that then goes into the delay unit. So this thing might be a beautiful slimline little controller, but you end up with this horrible dog's breakfast of cables and units to get it all to function. That is, if you don't want to go through a computer. But let's ignore all the pain and enjoy what the result is. Very quick tour of how I've set this up. This is because this has two delay units, A and B. So this is sort of like the A side, this is the B side. So this is a mix for delay A, mix for delay B, as in a wet mix. 3 EQ controls for delay A, 3 EQ controls for delay B. Time and time, feedback and feedback. And then these two are modulation, rate and depth. And then this is panning rate and depth. And these little buttons here for A side and B side are beat divisions. So it's whole note, half, quarter, eighth, 16th, dotted quarter, dotted eighth, and then some triplet stuff, and then the same over here. And the rest I've left for further inspiration. So let's just play a little pattern. And so it goes. So obviously you can move multiple parameters at once. Adjusting the EQ on this little thing is actually a giant pain, so very nice to float those around. Not every function on here you can put on a MIDI controller, but most of them are available. It's nice to be able to split up the two delays as well. Okay, let's try one more. So, good or bad, there's no way you're going to be doing that without multiple simultaneous control. So, time to program the Nemesis pedal, and here is the MIDI spec. First lot there, the delay engines. Well, the first 12 are on the pedal, and then there's another 11 to select. So that's probably one thing to have. Wet, dry, mix, modulation, depth and rate, even though they're dedicated knobs on the pedal, might be worth having them on the controller. Output level, and then we come to these very nice ones. Now normally these are only assigned occasionally to one particular engine or another, but they're sitting there lurking in the background if you can access them, so that's the joy of the MIDI controller. So we've got diffusion, distortion, high pass filter, low pass filter, sample rate reduction. There's another one a bit further down, I think, which is like a tape noise, like a tape age amount, so I'll have that as well. Then we get this whole area of the sweep filter. And the sweep filter is quite nice, so you get a filter, resonance, modulation, depth, mix, things like that. The only problem is it only affects tap number 1, so depending on how you've got things set up, it'll only be on the left hand side, so could be useful. Well, flutter, modulation, tremolo, pitch shift. So it'd be quite nice perhaps to have a little pitch shift control. It's only in a few of the engines there that the pitch shifting will work, but still could be good. And we've got the tap 2 beat divisions, not as extensive as tap 1. And we've got reassigning the knobs. There's the main tempo divisions, so it's a nice range there. So there's 14, so I'll assign them to buttons, I think. Octave shift for those particular engines. And then we get into the detailed pitch shifting. So a very nice mix of options here. Time to spread them around the NanoKontrol. So here we are, having mapped the Nemesis delays controls onto the NanoKontrol. Now the way the Nemesis works is a bit different. Each one of these delay engines, when you turn the knob, it comes with its own set of parameters embedded into the engine. So it might have a certain beat division, feedback level, filter control, tap levels, things like that, and you can program them yourself into the engine and save it. But all those other parameters we looked at are mapped onto here, so as you change the engine, you're going to get a different set of parameters that flow in. So then the idea would be to modify those with the controls on the NanoKontrol. Now, there's also 12 engines mapped on the dial here, and the remaining 13 delay engines I've put onto all these buttons here. So whenever you see me press one of these, that's hitting a different sound engine. Similarly to the Future Factory, most of the buttons here are on beat division, so it's the same sort of thing: whole step, half step, quarter, eighth, 16th. This time we've got 32nd, dotted quarters, dotted eighths. What's this? Swing quarter, 1/6, swing eighths, and golden ratio. This side is the tap 2 beat divisions, which are all a ratio of whatever the initial tap is. Across the top here, this is the feedback control, but this is the feedback intensity. So when we wind this one up, it gets us into dangerous territory. So if we just... So that isn't the feedback as such, that's the feedback maximum intensity. So if we wind that back to 0 but turn this one up, it'll just sit there safely. But if we wind this one up, then we'll quite quickly get into dangerous territory. So quite interesting the way those two feedbacks work. And that's nice because the delay engines themselves tend to embed feedback limits into the delay sound, so we can modify them. Mod rate and mod depth. Tap 1 volume, tap 2 volume. This is the intensity control, which is the same as the one here, and that just raises simultaneously a set of parameters as determined by Source Audio on a per engine basis. This is the pitch control for those few engines that have pitch in the repeats. Then with the sliders, it's quite interesting. I think we've got mix from 100% dry to 100% wet. We've got an output volume with a little bit of boost at the top end, a wow noise, sample rate reducer, diffusion amount, distortion amount, which is unfortunately pretty weak distortion. I'm used to pedals that sort of tear limbs asunder. Never mind. A low pass filter and a high pass filter, which are pretty good. So there's the controls. Let's see what they can do.